A fisherman follows a terrible odor into the brush beside a Florida Keys highway and finds a woman no one at the scene can identify. She has no clothing, identification, or obvious witness. Around her are fragments of a story: tire tracks in gravel, strands of hair along a rough path, a freshly broken branch, and one piece of a damaged vehicle. Within hours, that fragment will point detectives to a battered conversion van. Inside, they will find evidence far more disturbing than a missing panel. The owner will calmly place himself near the crime scene, invent another killer, and try to turn a detective's sympathy into a path to freedom. But every explanation will collide with the physical evidence. And behind the case is an even darker question. Was Michelle the only person he killed in Florida, or merely the only victim investigators could connect to him? /NN It begins around 2 in the afternoon near Baca Cut Bridge in Marathon, Florida. Families are spending a quiet day near the water when a fisherman notices an overpowering smell coming from an area just off the road. He moves closer, realizes what he has found, and calls 911. Responding officers discover an unclothed woman lying near the edge of a wooded area. Her body is already stiffening, suggesting she has been there for hours. /N/N The strong current around the bridge has caused fatal accidents before, so the first possibility is drowning. That possibility disappears as soon as officers examine her more carefully. They see injuries around her neck, blood, abrasions, and signs that she may have been dragged. What initially looked like another tragedy near dangerous water now appears to be a homicide. /N/N The woman has no identification with her. No clothing. No belongings that might immediately reveal where she lived or who knew her. The scene offers no convenient answer, but it does offer a trail. When Detective Matt Pitcher arrives, he studies the gravel access road and the damaged vegetation around it. Fresh tire marks lead toward the wooded area. Strands of the woman's hair appear along the route. Small trees and branches have been struck or broken, suggesting a vehicle entered the narrow space, moved carelessly, and left in a hurry. /N Beneath one freshly damaged branch, investigators find a broken piece from a vehicle. It is not much, just a dark fragment of exterior trim or bodywork, but it may be the only direct link between the scene and whoever brought the woman there. Pitcher knows the timing is especially dangerous. The Thanksgiving period is approaching, Marathon is crowded with visitors, and local businesses may soon overwrite surveillance recordings. If the killer passed a camera, investigators need that footage before it disappears. /N/N Pitcher divides the work into 2 urgent searches. One team begins visiting businesses and reviewing video for a damaged vehicle. Another carries the victim's photograph from bar to bar, hoping someone recognizes her. At first, the responses lead nowhere. People study the image and shake their heads. Every unsuccessful stop costs time, and without a name, detectives cannot reconstruct the woman's final hours. /N/N Then a bartender says she recognizes the woman, although she cannot remember her name. A second bartender recognizes her too and recalls seeing her work at the Sunset Grill a few miles away. Officers hurry to the restaurant, where a former employer finally identifies her as Michelle, a 51-year-old woman who had come to Florida from Wisconsin. /N/N The discovery gives the investigation a victim, but it also reveals a painful distance between Michelle and the people who loved her. No missing person report had led police to her. Her former employer explains that Michelle had children and an ex-husband and often talked about returning to her family. After officers contact relatives in Janesville, Wisconsin, they hear the same description repeatedly. Michelle was kind and had a good heart. She had lost contact with much of her family after moving to Florida, but she had not been forgotten. /N/N While one group restores Michelle's identity, another studies the broken vehicle part. A law enforcement officer with extensive knowledge of cars examines a photograph and quickly concludes that it came from a full-size van. He narrows it further, even producing an image of a van with the same general type and color. Pitcher remains cautious. Identifying a possible model from one broken fragment is useful, but finding the exact vehicle in a busy tourist town seems unlikely. /N/N For roughly 6 hours, officers review surveillance footage from businesses along the highway. Then a damaged black and silver Dodge conversion van appears on camera. Pieces are missing from its body, and its condition is consistent with a vehicle that pushed through branches. Investigators follow it from one camera to another, rebuilding its route across Marathon. At one point the van disappears near Kmart Plaza on U. South Highway 1, only a few miles from the place where Michelle was found. /N/N. When police run the license plate, the investigation changes immediately. The van is registered to 58-year-old Stephen Matthew Wolf. His history is not a minor record of arrests. In 1976, when he was 15, Wolf and 3 others killed 78-year-old Enrico Flori during a robbery in Boise, Idaho. Wolf received a lengthy prison sentence. The following year, he escaped from the Ada County Jail after sawing through a bar and climbing down from the 4th floor with improvised materials. He remained free for 6 days before being captured again. /N/N. The old case does not prove that Wolf killed Michelle, but it tells detectives they may be pursuing someone with a demonstrated capacity for lethal violence and evasion. Additional records describe deeply troubling behavior and long-term drug use. The damaged van is now more than a promising lead. Finding it becomes an urgent public safety operation. /N/N. Near midnight, deputies fan out around the area where surveillance last captured the vehicle. The search feels like an attempt to find a needle in a crowded strip of businesses, and detectives know Wolf could already be leaving the Keys. Then officers spot the van parked near a McDonald's and a Winn-Dixie. They approach from multiple directions, clear nearby civilians from danger, and issue commands for the person inside to show his hands. /N/N. Wolf emerges without resisting. He appears calm, even though armed deputies have surrounded the vehicle and have not explained the full reason for the detention. Once he is secured, officers inspect the van's exterior. The missing section matches the fragment recovered near Michelle's body. To investigators standing in the parking lot, the physical fit is startling. The small piece found beneath a broken branch has led them directly to its source. /N/N. But a matching vehicle part is not yet a complete murder case. It may place Wolf's van at the scene, but it does not, by itself, establish what happened inside the vehicle or who caused Michelle's death. Pitcher understands that a defense attorney could argue Wolf damaged the van there for an innocent reason. Investigators need evidence that connects Michelle, Wolf, the van, and the assault. /N/N. At the sheriff's office, Pitcher begins with report rather than accusation. He asks Wolf to describe his previous day. Wolf talks freely and soon makes a remarkable admission. He went to the Baca Cut area looking for a place to sleep. He says the road was sandy and overgrown, the van was difficult to turn, and branches scraped and damaged it as he tried to leave. Without being forced into a contradiction, Wolf has placed himself and his vehicle at the location where Michelle's body was discovered. /N/N. He even gives an approximate time in the afternoon. Yet he insists the damage has nothing to do with a crime. When Pitcher examines his hands, he finds no obvious scratches. Wolf also discusses his years in prison with the ease of someone familiar with interrogations. Despite the suspicious admission, detectives still lack enough evidence to rely on a confession or hold him indefinitely. Time is again working against them. /N. But next morning, residents begin contacting police. Some had recently ridden in Wolf's van and fear their fingerprints might make them look involved. Their statements help detectives account for several people who had been inside the vehicle before the killing. One witness, Tracy, also mentions a man named Terry, a friend of Michelle's who spoke with Wolf by phone for about 5 minutes a few hours before the killing. /N/N. Terry initially refuses to cooperate. He distrusts police and reacts angrily when questioned about Michelle and Wolf. Detectives press him with the phone record, making clear that the call cannot simply be denied. Eventually, his resistance gives way to information the case has been missing. Terry says Michelle had been staying and sleeping in Wolf's van. He describes arguments and threats between them and says he had confronted Wolf because he was concerned about how Michelle was being treated. /N/N. Terry's account does not replace physical evidence, but it destroys the idea that Wolf and Michelle were strangers whose paths crossed by accident. It establishes a direct, recent relationship and gives detectives a reason Michelle's hair, blood, or belongings might be found inside the van. It also helps them understand why Wolf may need a new story before the forensic results arrive. N Pitcher spends hours studying Wolf's behavior and history. He concludes that a direct attack may only make Wolf retreat, so he continues building a personal connection. That afternoon, he takes Wolf outside for a cigarette. Away from the formal interrogation room, Wolf becomes emotional. He says someone died, but insists the death was not caused by him. Then he offers a dramatic alternative. N According to Wolf, he picked up Michelle and a younger man. He claims the pair fought in the back of the van while he drove. The man supposedly killed Michelle, announced that she was dead, and helped remove her body near the bridge. Wolf admits only to participating in the cover-up. He portrays himself as frightened, trapped, and guilty of failing to call police, not murder. N For a moment, the claim cannot be dismissed without checking it. Detectives knew Michelle had an ex-boyfriend who had repeatedly contacted or harassed her online. But Wolf's description does not match that man. He describes someone younger, thin, and dark-haired. The known ex-boyfriend was older, heavier, and gray-haired. Wolf cannot provide a verifiable identity, and his account shifts responsibility onto a stranger who conveniently vanished. N While Wolf tells this story, the search of the van is producing answers that do not depend on his honesty. Investigators dismantle parts of the homemade sleeping area and examine the mattress, cushions, floor, and other surfaces. They find blood beneath material Wolf appears to have cleaned or covered. They recover blonde hair consistent with Michelle's, women's clothing and underwear, and other unsettling items. The relevant DNA evidence links the van to Wolf and Michelle, not to the mysterious younger man he described. N Police also recover a bloody shirt that had been discarded nearby, and forensic testing connects Michelle to items inside the van. The autopsy and crime scene evidence show that she suffered a severe assault before her body was left near the bridge. The details are deeply disturbing, but the central evidentiary point is clear. Michelle was injured inside the space Wolf controlled, and traces of that violence remain despite efforts to remove or hide them. N The forensic search also allowed investigators to test Wolf's timeline against his own movements. Cameras had already shown the damaged van traveling through town, and Wolf had admitted entering the exact access road where the body was found. The broken exterior piece demonstrated physical contact with the scene, while the interior evidence showed that Michelle had not merely crossed paths with him somewhere else. The location, vehicle, victim, and suspect were now connected through independent sources. Even if one witness became uncertain or one statement was challenged, the remaining evidence still pointed in the same direction. N Wolf's alternative story also failed at the level of ordinary logic. He claimed to have watched a violent struggle unfold behind him, continued driving, helped dispose of Michelle, discarded evidence, and then told no one. Yet he could not identify the supposed attacker, explain why that man left no meaningful trace, or reconcile the description with Michelle's known ex-boyfriend. The more detail he added, the more the story appeared designed around facts he believed police already knew. He conceded enough to explain his van at the bridge and Michelle inside it, but tried to reserve the act of killing for an invented passenger. Investigators recognized the pattern, an admission carefully limited to the evidence he thought could no longer be denied. That strategy might have created doubt without the forensic search, but every concession narrowed the space in which innocence could survive. N Pitcher returns to Wolf with the results. The tone changes. He identifies Michelle's hair, confronts him with the blood beneath the bedding, and challenges his explanations for the clothing found inside. Wolf denies killing her. He offers confused answers about who owned particular items and claims he does not know how the blood or hair got there. Each denial makes his invented passenger less believable because the physical evidence does not support the presence of that supposed killer. N The interrogation also takes an unusual psychological turn. Through repeated conversations, Wolf appears to form a personal attachment to Pitcher. At one point, after Pitcher briefly places a hand on his shoulder, Wolf says he normally does not allow that because of his prison experience, but that he accepts it from Pitcher. The detective realizes the report has become powerful. Wolf seems to view him not simply as an investigator, But as someone whose approval matters, /N Pitcher uses that bond to keep Wolf talking. But he does not confuse report with trust. He repeatedly frames the issue as a need to understand why the killing happened, not whether it happened. Wolf continues to resist a full confession. By then, however, the prosecution no longer needs his permission to tell the story. The broken van part, surveillance trail, his own admission that he drove into the disposal area, Michelle's connection to the van, the blood and hair, the discarded evidence, and the forensic findings form a chain stronger than any one clue alone. /N. In 2023, Stephen Matthew Wolf was convicted of first-degree murder, 2 counts of battery, and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to death. The verdict ensured that the man who had already participated in a killing as a teenager would not return to the streets after Michelle's murder. /N. Yet conviction did not answer every question. Investigators found items in the van that raised concern about other women, and Pitcher recalled biological evidence that had not been identified as belonging to either Wolf or Michelle. Wolf had lived in the van and moved through places where long periods of his life were difficult to reconstruct. For those reasons, Pitcher came to believe there could be additional victims. That remains his assessment, not a proven conclusion. No complete list of other crimes emerged from the investigation, and Wolf refused to give him an answer. /N. Years later, after a career that included dangerous undercover work, Pitcher said this case still stood apart because of its brutality and the questions left behind. As of late April 2026, Wolf remained on Florida's death row. Whether he will ever identify another victim, reveal another location, or admit the truth about Michelle is uncertain. For detectives, that uncertainty remains the final shadow cast by the case. /N. What is certain is how this case was solved. A woman found without identification became Michelle again because bartenders and a former employer recognized her. A piece of broken vehicle trim became a license plate because investigators preserved video before it vanished. Community witnesses established the relationship Wolf tried to hide. Patient interviewing exposed the weaknesses in his story. And forensic evidence inside the van showed what his denials could not erase. /N. For Michelle's family, justice cannot restore the years or conversations they lost. But the investigation made sure she was not left as an unnamed body beside a road, and it prevented her killer from disappearing behind another false story. Which clue do you think changed the case most? The broken van fragment, the surveillance trail, Terry's statement, or the evidence hidden beneath the bedding? Whatever the answer, the case proves that even when a killer believes he has removed every connection, one overlooked fragment can bring the entire truth back into view.